Balakun, a bridge to Ukraine. Join the conversation at balakun.org.
Балакун – міст в Україну. Приєднуйтесь до наших розмов на www.balakun.org.
Please subscribe.
Since we are recording this on April the 25th, we're going to talk about Chornobyl.
Chornobyl. Yeah, we have to talk about it.
Mhm.
We have to remember April 26th marks the 36th anniversary of the tragedy at the Chornobyl Nuclear Power Plant, which became the largest man-made disaster of the 20th century. In April 1986, 3/4 of the territory of Europe was contaminated with radioactive cesium. And in the days after accident, 8.5 million residents of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia received significant doses of radiation, and about 500,000 of them died from the effects of radiation. By the end of the summer that year, 1986, more than 90,000 people were evacuated from the infected zone, and 81 settlements in Ukraine became deserted. That's just official numbers. I guess the consequences were much, or not were, but are much, much larger. And the thing is that the Soviet authorities did everything to hide the consequences of the disaster from the world. For 2 days, the world knew nothing about this. On April 27th, a sharp increase in the radiation background was recorded in Denmark and Sweden,
Mhm.
after which the Swedish authorities turned to Moscow with a demand to explain.
Mhm.
And to hide this, the authorities of the Ukrainian Soviet Republic gathered at festive demonstration, and thousands of people, including children, participated in it. It was on the May the 1st, and that was the way to show the world that nothing happened. And here is the most cynical thing, that at that time, the leadership of the Soviet Union proclaimed publicity and openness as the new approach to the society, that everything should be public and should be opened, so-called free press, whatever. However, the emergency at the Chernobyl nuclear plant proved the falsity of the slogans.
Mhm.
And realizing that environmental disaster of the scale would have negative consequences for the communist regime, the leadership of the USSR chose a course to silence it.
Mhm.
All information about Chernobyl disaster immediately came under the ideological control of the Communist Party, as usual. At the same time, KGB organized so-called preventive conversations that they held with panickers, those who have panic. There were people that just wandered the streets and all the facilities, just monitored everything that what people thought and what people said. The Institute of History of Ukraine, of the National Academy of Science, and the Security Service of Ukraine prepared a two-volume Chernobyl dossier of the KGB, which was published by the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance. So, what happened on the night of April 26, 1986? On April 25th, at the Chornobyl Nuclear Power Plant, the fourth power unit was supposed to be stopped experimentally to study the possibility of using inertia turbo generator in case of loss of power supply. Although the technical circumstances did not correspond to the test plan, it was not cancelled. The experiment began on April 26 at 1:23 in the morning. The situation got out of control. At 1:25, two explosions ran out a few seconds apart. The reactor completely collapsed. More than 30 fires broke out. The main ones were extinguished after an hour, and the fire was completely extinguished by 5 p.m. on April 26. However, an intense fire eventually broke out in the central hall of the fourth block, which was fought with helicopter equipment until May 10th. At the time of the accident, 17 workers were on premises of the fourth power unit. Valery Hodemchuk, the senior operator of the reactor workshop, died under the rubble. On the afternoon of April 26, engineer Volodymyr Shashanok died of exposure. 11 workers received radiation doses. They all died of radiation sickness by May 20, 1986, in Moscow Hospital number 6. Another 14 people from the station staff received doses that caused radiation sickness of the 3rd and 4th degrees. The next day after the accident, the government commission decided on the immediate shutdown on the 1st and 2nd power units and the evacuation of the population of Pripyat, so-called 10-kilometer zone. The first official announcement in the USSR under the pressure of the international community was made on April 28th at 9 p.m. The main television news program, Vremya, succinctly reported there was an accident at the Chornobyl Nuclear Power Plant. One of the nuclear reactors was damaged. Measures are being taken to eliminate the consequences of the accident. Assistance is provided to the injured. A government commission has been created.
That was 2 days later.
2 days later, and as it was just an accident, something little happened. That was the official announcement. Gathering some information before recording this episode, I've run into an interview, not an interview, it's more of a talk show. There was one scientist that told that all the materials that were provided to build this power plant were not of that good quality. And many people said that there should be different materials, but no one listened. Another thing that scientists told was that power plant was only tested and operators or people there knew how to operate it only whether it worked on the lowest scale or on the highest scale, but not in the middle. So this middle scale was very dangerous, as it wasn't really researched and no one knew how to deal with it. That power plant and the intensity of its work was ruled by the Kyivenergo, from the operators from Kyiv, not from Chernobyl itself, not by scientists.
So this was before you were born.
Yeah, it was a couple of years before I born.
Do you know people who were alive at the time?
My friend told me she was born in 1976. She was 10 years when it happens. And she lived in Kyiv Oblast, but on the left bank of Kyiv, or on the other bank. And she remembers taking these iodine pills that time.
I just know one person who was 4 years old at the time and lived in Kiev, and he and his family were evacuated to Moscow for several months.
Many people from that region were evacuated to Crimea at that time. But because of little knowledge and little awareness of what was going on, people in Crimea were afraid of those people, as if they were contagious or they could contaminate them.
So before the full-scale invasion, there were two ways that you could visit. One is on a guided tour with a bus and a Geiger counter who makes sure that you don't go anywhere you shouldn't, and you'll be driven through. So you would have been driven through certain areas and been able to see abandoned buildings and the woods. The other way you can do it is by sneaking in. And somebody was telling me about their experiences the other night. He and his friends figured out the best way to get, because the exclusion zone is enormous. It's something like 170 kilometers to get all the way. So they went by bike. And as long as you don't dig holes or move around the ground, then they felt pretty safe driving their bikes through. And they measured the radiation on their bikes afterwards as well, and it wasn't very high, even after 3 days of going on their excursion. But he told me about a little bit about the experience, and he's so unhappy now that he might never be able to go back there, because he described it as just the most incredible environment. If you can imagine a national park or something that's has hardly had any humans in it for decades, full of animals and just completely untouched forests.
We call people who are wandering there and sneaking there, we call them stalkers. I guess the term stalker for those who sneak to Chernobyl zone came from the game Stalker, that stands for scavengers, trespassers, adventurers, loners, killers, explorers, robbers. Yeah, and the bad thing about those trespassers is many of them, and I won't say that everyone, but many of them are looters. Like I've seen this episode from the YouTube channel Hashi. When they were in that zone, they were having this unofficial tour, but with one of the officials, one of those who do these official tours, and but they were not on that official places there, and there were some houses with their signs: "We live here, please don't loot." The other one, if that they take some artifacts from there and they sell it. And those artifacts could be rather dangerous also. And I'm not really sure whether that's a right thing to break the official borders of the dead zone and to wander around the place of tragedy.
Why do you think people are so curious about it? I think part of it is you're not allowed to go. If you're not allowed to go somewhere, it makes you curious.
Yeah, it's just I can name the first that came to my mind is that everything that is forbidden, that is interesting. The first one. The second one, that people just lack some fairy tale in their life. And there are a lot of videos and conspiracies and stories, whatever, about some anomalies there, about some creatures that were created under the influence of radiation, and about some even conspiracies about some people who were born there and they are mutants, some crazy theories about it. And maybe just people lack this fairy tale in their lives, and that's why they go there. That's one of another thing that comes up to my mind. And the third one is just people are explorers. That's human nature, to explore unknown.
So I translated this from his posts. Pripyat, dawn on the road with a view of the reactor and the sarcophagus shelter. Will you ask if there is sound? The answer is unequivocal. Yes, there is sound. It oozes with positivity and the absence of people, nature that has been cleansed of urban garbage and bustle. When you meet people just like you, those who can't imagine their life without travel, roads, and wheels. So this time we organized a bicycle trip to the Chernobyl zone. Forbidden, bold, and brave. There were night crossings, a track along which a herd of wild horses was running, escape from patrol cars with security, sunset on a high-rise building in the abandoned city of Pripyat, dawn on the highway with a view of the reactor and the sarcophagus shelter. There is only one conclusion. There is a lot of happiness there.
The beginning of 2022, the full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine. And part of the invasion went through Chernobyl zone. And those morons dug trenches in the red forest.
Can you explain what the red forest is?
The red forest is approximately 10 square kilometer zone covered with forest near Chornobyl power plant that was the mostly contaminated after the explosion, and most trees, pines mostly, they turned red. Or another name of this forest is rust forest. So it's the color of rust more than red, like ginger red.
So those morons.
Those morons actually dug trenches in that forest. There are two things about that. First, that they are very stupid. They dug trenches, and that's why they eventually, many of them died or just got sick. The bad part that they just made those dust, and the territory of the contamination was contaminated again, a recontamination, I can say. So that's the bad part. Yeah. And that time they also occupied Chernobyl power plant, and that was rather dangerous because most of them were not scientists, and they knew nothing about what could happen.
I'm reading here that they trashed and looted the facilities of the power plant, and some radioactive materials were later tracked in Gomel and Minsk in Belarus.
Yeah, they took everything with them. They took many things with them, and I guess those radioactive parts traveled with them first to Belarus, then to their homelands.
Apparently, around 200 died in hospital in Belarus from acute radiation poisoning.
I just can't think clearly about that. Like I thought everyone knew what that zone was, and they actually dug there.
I don't know if it's true or not, but I remember reading that they had an old map or something.
I don't know either, but you said that they really had old maps from 60s, I guess. So even before the Chernobyl power plant was.
Where did you hear that? I heard it on Twitter, so I have no idea if it's true.
Yeah, same. Either Twitter or Telegram. It was more than 2 years ago, and too much happened from that time that I cannot really recall.
The other thing that both Alina and Mirko talked about was how the area is now full of mines and explosives as well. So it's never going to be safe as a, I shouldn't say safe because it was already radioactive, but it's not going to be, it's going to be a long time before anyone can go back there.
Yeah, and it cannot be safe because those mines, some animals could be blown on that mines, and having explosions there, some radioactive material, I guess the wind could transfer it somewhere else, and the area of contamination could expand. So just imagine that some beer or some bear. Yeah, just imagine that some bear or a deer could just contract that mine. And before getting to Zaporizhia power plant, I would also refer to one other thing. Last year, Russians blown Kakhovska hydro power plant. And there was a risk, or not just, there's always a risk that they would do something even more stupid. But there were some propagandists who called to blow every other hydropower plants. And the awful thing is, not far from Chernobyl zone, there's a so-called Kievan Sea, or Kievan hydroelectric power plant. On the floor of that Kievan Sea, there's a lot of radioactive material that is lying there. So if they blew this Kievan hydroelectric power plant or the dam, that could be another radioactive disaster. And actually, there were a lot of drones over that Kievan Sea already, and a lot of missiles there that could possibly hit it.
I couldn't believe watching fighting around the Zaporizhia nuclear plant at the start. I just remember thinking, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? No, not there.
They just blackmailing the world with the possible tragedy of explosion of Zaporizhia power plant.
It was, I mean, people kept posting things like, oh, you know, these plants are designed to withstand all sorts of earthquakes and accidents and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, we've already had 2 nuclear disasters in power plants that were designed to that one. And now there are people directing missiles at it. Even in the best of circumstances, accidents can happen. What happens when you people under, you know, armed guard trying to operate a facility?
They use this power plant as a cover. They do the shelling out of Zaporizhia power plant, and they keep the troops and keep the artillery. They keep the artillery at that power plant, and that's really dangerous.
So I guess what most people will know about what happened is from the HBO series. You said that you watched that. Did you find it accurate and in any way illuminating, or was it something that you already knew? What did you think about that?
I can say that throughout all the fictional films, this one is the most accurate.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of documentaries at this point, but people just don't like too many documentaries these days.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people that obviously do, and that's good for them. But most people just like fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And watching this series, there are some factological and even emotional mistakes, and there are some sort of Russia propaganda also, because they infiltrated even here,
How so?
using some poems of Russian poets and using some Russian songs and some things like the Russian territory, yada yada. But it was before full scale, and
Mm-hmm.
many people just perceived Ukraine as a part of Russia, even though Ukraine has been independent for 30 years already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, the preference of the authorities to cover up rather than protect people was something that really struck me like as surprising or shocking.
That was just regime, I guess. As a couple episodes ago, we had Yana as a guest on our podcast, and she told about science in Soviet Union, how it was serving ideology of the Soviets, how it took the facts and then adjusted all the science onto it.
So can we move on to the babushkas of Chernobyl?
I haven't watched it, so you tell me about it.
Okay, it's fantastic. It's one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. It came out in 2015. So it's described here as an affectionate portrait of a group of women who, after the disaster and evacuation, returned to the exclusion zone surrounding the nuclear plant and have resided there semi-officially for years. So there's people that go and check on them every once in a while and say, we've got somewhere for you to go if you want to leave. And they've been saying no for the last 36 years. There's only 6 or 7 of them, and they all live in their own houses. And they meet up and have meals together and go to church together. And well, yeah, I guess as this description says, it's a very affectionate portrayal of these old ladies who just didn't want to leave their homes. There's also some scientists who go and check the levels of radiations in the areas that they live in and in their food. And they're actually quite high in some, it changes over time. But it also, one of the scientists explains that the radiation affects young people much worse because they're growing and there's more cell division going on in their bodies. And for older people, the effects are not as severe. So that's one theory about why these women can survive there so long. But they're just kind of in their own little isolated world. To get to the bus stop, they have to walk through these incredible woods that no one's been in for decades. They're in the same houses that they lived in before the disasters. So they've come back to their own houses. They've gone back to where they lived before the accident.
Yeah, just imagine that they have nothing but their houses. That it was everything that they built all their life, and they have been living there all their lives. And they just ignore the potential damage of being contaminated by radiation. And they just didn't trust anyone. Because in that region, people seen everything. First, they saw the collectivization in the beginning of the 20th century. Then they saw the famine, Holodomor. Then they saw the Soviets. Then they saw German occupiers. Then back Soviets. And they just didn't trust anyone. And if someone said that they had to leave, they won't.
One thing about that documentary that kind of made me understand a little better about the people who don't want to leave the areas really near the front line. All the people who they just won't leave their homes, whatever happens. Because for ages I was like, why aren't they leaving? Why aren't they being evacuated? And I didn't really get it.
Maybe we could remember the thing that our guest Mobile said about Kremlin not leaving Crimea right now, as they have been deprived of their houses for so long that under any circumstances would they leave. Or maybe they they themselves were deprived, as for the Chernobyl zone, but they knew many people who were deported, as the deportation of those who had something more than just a house. I mean, some horses or some cows, and they could be either deported or just forced to leave. There was the story that there were a lot of stories that everyone knew, and maybe that was another reason for them not to leave their houses. And when you linked me that documentary, I've linked you back with the Brahma film. There's theater play, Stalkers, called Stalkers, and the fictional movie, a fictional film, Brahma, The Gate. And this film is actually about that old woman that lives in that zone, and about her daughter and her grandson. It covers the hard life of those who were displaced and got back there. And why it's called Stalkers, the main thing is about those people who visited that zone, and the main conflict is built upon it. I won't spoil the plot. I think this film is just amazing. I watched it several times, and each time I have goosebumps. And the same actors who played in this film, they are in this theater play, and from time to time they travel, they show this play in Europe. And if anyone gets a chance to watch it, to attend this play, it just must have. I've been to this play last year, and it has less effect than film has, because in the film some things could be added with the technical or with computer, yeah, special effects and computer effects, like in post-production. But in the energy that the main character gives you, played by Irma Witowska, it's just, I cannot explain or describe. One just has to watch it. It's amazing.
Okay, happy end. Toot toot.